Okay, so welcome again. So the talk that I'm going to give this morning is probably going to be a bit longer than yesterday. It's a bit fuller, so just to warn you about that before we begin. And what I'm going to be trying to do today is going to be bringing this idea of sensitivity to our own unique way of knowing. How do we know and interact with the world? And I'll be suggesting that our way of knowing, our way of interacting with the world leads us into what can be seen as a journey into a mandala. And so I'm going to be talking a bit about mandalas, and then I can conclude by talking about Sangha's terms, the true individual. What is the true individual? But I'm going to begin with a quote from James Hollis, which is, "We are flung from the amniotic sea into this life, tied to matter, to gravity, to mortality. A fire burns in each of us, a tungsten intensity that flares and flames a while and then departs. From whence and whither to remain mysteries, and who we are on this planet and for what purpose remains a mystery as well. Although the world is full of people who will tell you who you are and what you are to do and not to do, they too wander amid their unaddressed confusion, fear and need for consensual belief, still their own anxious journey. Whether you show up as you in this brief transit we call life, or are defined by history or context, or shrill partisan urgencies, substantially depends on you. No greater difficulty may be found than living this journey as mindfully, as accountably as we can. But no greater task brings more dignity and purpose to our lives." So this is a choice for us, to show up here in Sangha as ourselves or in the guise that others have made for us. And this is the challenge really that I'm going to be exploring today. I do this because the recognition of what we describe as our spiritual life is primarily a relational life. And much of what we describe as spiritual practice is simply bringing consciousness and choice to our internal and external patterns of relationship. And these are hugely influenced, if not defined, by our past, by our cultural and our social conditioning. We will have been molded by tragedy, by illness, by shame, by blind suffering. We will have been molded by joy and meaning, by love and longing. And we will have learnt how to stay safe and cared for. And most importantly, we will have learnt what to keep hidden and protected to allow us to function here in this world. So to fill out this invitation to step into the mandala, into the Sangha as yourself, I'm going to say a little about mandalas and gateways, and then this term, the true individual. So to begin, let's just define a mandala. So a mandala is simply a way of patterning or bringing together different objects or symbols, or in this case people, that are united by their arrangement around or in relation to a unifying central point. So we might describe the Sangha as individuals coming together, trusting themselves through their relation to each other, and by enlivening their own capacity to rest in unbounded awareness and discover all that binds as the way to release to the collective heart of the mandala. So within Triratna, many of us will be familiar with the Buddha mandala, and this is really what traditionally sits at the heart of the Sangha Mandala, almost like a mandala within a mandala. So the Buddha mandala expresses the many different manifestations of the wisdom of the enlightened heart and mind. So we might see these different Buddha forms like light refracted through a prism, revealing the myriad vibrant colours appearing out of the lucid, clear light of the Dharma, which is emanating from the centre of the mandala. Or we might picture the four Buddha figures as embodying the wisdoms arranged around the central numinal presence of the Buddha as immanent womb-like potential at the core of the mandala and at the core of our own nature. There is this always emergent centre, which is sometimes it's termed the Dharma Dhatu, the heart of the Dharma. This is the mystery of the not two that we began with, the mystery of the not two of form and emptiness. And from this centre radiates out the dance of manifestation, this abundant fecundity. And this dynamic core resonates through every being in the mandala and calls each of us to express the potential of our own unique life as we walk a weaving path ever deeper into the mystery of this mandala. So we need to remember these forms, the way we're describing the mandala is a poetic rendering. They are symbolic images and forms to act as guides or maybe maps to inspire our engagement with the Sangha. And the aim of this talk is to show that we serve this half of the mandala by becoming fearless and trusting our own being, but without clinging to or having to bolster any fixed sense of what that might be, who we are, and as importantly, who the other is. So this is one of the greatest gifts we can give one another, the gift of fearlessness. So I'm inviting you today to be fearlessly yourself. I want you to know that you don't have to be any particular type of person, any particular way of being in order to step into the mandala of the Sangha. In fact, my invitation and challenge to you is to encourage you to be wholeheartedly yourself. Trust your knowing, trust your sensibility. My second invitation and challenge to you is that as we step into the Sangha Mandala and we come into relation to other practitioners, we try to meet them just as they are, not as we think they are, not as we think they should be or could be, because we need to remember we're not here to fashion others into our own likeness or become like blank canvases upon which on which they can receive our projections, our own biases, our own views. We're here in the Sangha Mandala to simply meet, to be witnesses and mirrors for each other, not saviours or judges. We're practicing and living our lives alongside each other, taking responsibility for our own life within this Sangha Mandala. So I've been stressing this need for taking charge, taking responsibility for our own life, our own sensibilities. Because I think for me, I believe that we receive and engage and express the Dharma in as many unique and innumerable ways as there are members of the Sangha. There are innumerable paths to the heart of the mandala. In the Vimalakirti Nadesha, this idea is expressed like this. So this is the Buddha explaining to Ananda the numerous ways in which beings are transformed by the Dharma. He said, there are those that accomplish the Buddha work by means of food, by means of water, those that do so by means of mansions, by means of magical incantations. There are Buddha fields that accomplish the work by means of teaching living beings words, definitions, and examples, such as dreams, images, the reflection of moon in water, echoes, illusions, mirages. And there are those that teach by making words understandable, and those that accomplish the Buddha work without speech, by silence, by inexpressibility and unteachability. Amongst all the activities, enjoyments, and practices of the Buddhas, there are none that do not accomplish the Buddha work. Finally, Ananda, the Buddhas accomplish the Buddha work by means of the 4 maras and all the 84,000 types of passion that afflict living beings. So Vimalakirti is saying the Buddha work is expressed in innumerable forms, and each unique form is a gateway into the Buddha fields. And I'm saying this, I'm reading this, because recognizing our own gateway, knowing how and where we step into the mandala, defines and brings meaning to our own unique embodiment. So these aren't random sensations we're experiencing. What is alive in us are specific gifts for each of us. And these gifts are faint reflections, or certainly the foundations of the wisdom that resonates from the heart of the mandala. So as we step into the Sangha Mandala, it's really crucial that we recognize our own unique sensibilities and ways of knowing, because this affects how we perceive the space of the mandala in which we're moving through. It will be affecting the nature of our meetings, the architecture of our knowing. It will be defining our perception of the landscape, the distinct territories that we are passing through as we're moving towards this heart of the mandala. And maybe most importantly, knowing the nature of our own gateway, the way in which we know and interact with this somatic cloud of sensation will lead us to our own personal cremation ground, where we will discover for ourselves that which needs to be released and that which needs to be honored in order to respond to this calling from the center of the mandala. The Sangharakshita spoke at great length about the true individual and the Sangha. So I thought it might be helpful this morning just to unpack this term, the true individual, as it might help clarify my exhortation to you to be fearless and trust who you are and what you are becoming. I also do it because I think it might help alleviate some of the possible confusion that can arise around the unhelpful, well, I think it's unhelpful language of non-self and emptiness, through which we can so easily misinterpret and distort the vision of the spiritual life, which lies at the heart of this Sangha Mandala. So Sangharakshita says in What is the Sangha? We do not have to drop the concept of self so long as we are clear it is an operational concept. If you start getting too scrupulous about these terms, it means you're taking them too literally, in which case even your non-self becomes a self. The intelligent Buddhist makes creative use of concepts. They are not to be taken literally as matters of dogma or blind belief. The Dharma is probably closer to poetry than to science, and really communicating it is more like putting across the beauty of a work of art, trying to put across the beauty of a work of art than trying to convey a set of scientific laws that you've understood. So in this writing, Sangharakshita is avoiding risk of literalizing the term self and non-self by creating this wholly new term, the true individual. And he explains the term not by describing what it is, but what it isn't. And I think this is a really helpful strategy for avoiding fixing this term. So he's talking particularly about what we let go of rather than what remains through letting go. And I think this is a very helpful distinction, because it reinforces again something I've been trying to communicate during the course of this week so far, is that we're talking about trying to release and relax rather than grip, and noticing the sort of different feel to those two qualities. So Sangharakshita defines the true individual as having released from three limiting sets of views. And these views are described as fetters, and are said to diminish and distort our potential. So in the language of James Hollis, Sangharakshita is suggesting we turn up into our life by letting go of what we are not. So the first release is a belief in an ongoing and fixed personality or self that is unchangeable and real. And we do this in relation to ourselves and to each other. This belief is held in place by, in most of us, by two trends of thought, which tends to be either nihilistic or eternalistic. So the eternalist believes that within each of us there's an essence that's unchanging and moves through life heading towards some future goal of enlightenment, of heaven, everlasting peace. And if we veer towards this eternalistic view, we'll tend to see the trials of this life having to be endured or worked with, for the hope of some redemption in the future. And this is the fear that we should be somewhere else or be someone else. Eternalism makes simply being never quite enough. We're not sufficient as we are from the eternalist perspective. Eternalism makes simply being this sense of being never enough. We are subtly or not so subtly trying to get someplace, some perfection, either in meditation, in friendship, in relationship. We're looking towards something which is not right here. Alternatively, eternalism can lead us to a sense of a lack of urgency. Well, there's always another life, another turn around the block, so we really don't have to get up now and live our own life right now. Now, conversely, the nihilist believes that at death nothing remains, nothing continues beyond the last breath. The self is completely at the mercy of the body with all its pains and pleasures. The self is completely the self is completely at the mercy of the body with all its pains and pleasures. And this limited perspective denies any sense of causal links that allow or encourage maturation, development, and transformation. So the nihilist would see no point engaging with Sangha as practice, because the nihilist is simply a victim to life. Change and circumstances are arising and passing as random acts of fate beyond our control. Life is some sort of cruel joke that we seem to find ourselves participating in, and which thankfully ends in the dark, empty void of death. So Sangharakshita suggests that the true individual treads the middle way between these two extremes. So we have to know where we are, what our current experience really is, whilst recognizing that appearances are always in flux, so we don't become fixated or over-identified with what's arising within and around us. And we fearlessly attend to this fluidity, because this is the primary pathway, the gate to freedom, pictured at the heart of the mandala. What Sangha is offering us is the support, the inspiration, and even challenge that leads us deeper into this mystery of fluid being, by helping us see without judgment where we are creating a fixed sense of ourselves or each other. And this is why the practice of Sangha is earthed in the actual. This is certainly why we have been really keen to promote Bodhidharma in the centre, and our meditation teaching places such emphasis on meditation as an embodied experience. It's because through the body we know this truth of fluidity. It's the nature of the true individual, seen so much vividly and directly, rather than if we attempt to engage with this truth simply conceptually. I really appreciate the language of knowing through the body as engaging with the somatic cloud of sensation. So this phrase has come from Tejananda, and I find it really helpful as it points to this reality that what we describe as our body is actually experienced more like a constant flux of sensations rather than anything fixed or solid. When we really explore the actual sensations we're in, we quickly can discover that which we label as our limbs, our guts, our heart, genitals, hands and feet are all interpretations of a constant flux of responses, sometimes vivid, sometimes dull or even absent. And these flickering sensations, are less solid than we might want to acknowledge. When we look closely at these sensations, we find that what we thought was solid is more like a vibration, a pulse of energy arising in a lucid spaciousness of awareness. And we might usefully ask, where are the edges to these sensations? Or maybe a more pertinent question, where do they begin and end? Where do we begin and end? So this leads me on to the second limiting view, the second fetter, which is released by the true individual. And this is letting go of unhealthy doubt or confusion about the value of living in awareness and deepening our relation to Sangha. Until we let go of these limiting views, we will tend to drift through our life. Our sense of fixed selfhood may have weakened, but will still be washed around by and act out of the currents of our unconscious drives. We'll tend to see ourselves as separate individualists or seeking approval from the group. We will live as outsiders or as conformists, defined by a relationship to all that we perceive as other or the same. A true individual has a strong sense of their own boundaries of identity, from which they can enter into healthy relation with others. They're able to bear their differences and their commonality. The true individual places faith in awareness to lead us towards knowledge of how things really are, rather than trying to impose a set of views onto direct experience. So the true individual integrates the many different patterns that may be dominant or silent aspects of our being, not to fix them, but to release the energy held within them, to end the fight with what should or shouldn't be, all which can become visible in awareness and through the mirror of Sangha. In relation to this, the true individual is less driven by seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. The true individual engages with Sangha as practice, primarily because they want to wake up fully into how things are, rather than simply to avoid pain and gather as much pleasure as possible. I stress this second aspect of the true individual because we may have to remind ourselves that what we're doing when we begin to discover that the work of being with the body isn't always pleasurable. It doesn't always lead to immediate gratification. Alchemy's got many terms for the processes of transformation and maturation that arise in our bodies. The heat of awareness may begin to lead us into many different experiences of transformation. For instance, we may find ourselves in states of putrefaction, or of burning, or distilling, or being stirred, or soaked, or sifted. We might feel desiccated, or heavy with moisture. We may feel energy evaporating or condensing. And the question is, can we bring kind awareness to all that arises? Can we trust this process of the Mandala path and allow our body-mind to relax out of the self-imposed fantasies or ideals that we've picked up and are trying to impose on experience? Can we trust awareness? Trust that when we let go, we will be held by a greater presence, a greater awareness that is calling us, you and me, beckoning us to recognize that the heart of the mandala is always right here. And finally, the third fetter. So the third fetter is a reliance on ethical rules and religious observances as ends in themselves. So this is not to say that the true individual does not live ethically and engage in religious observances, for example, meditation and puja. It's just that the true individual recognizes these are strategies to move ever deeper towards the heart of the mandala. Ethics, any observances are not ends in themselves. This means that the fruits of meditation, of puja, of relationship are not there to be clung to or pursued. And this is where the deeper wisdom arises, by stepping into the open space of the unknowable next moment, without the preconceived ideas of how things are going to be or will be as a consequence of acting in particular ways. So these three aspects, recognizing ourselves as fluid being, placing our faith in the practice of awareness, and letting go of relying on any particular form of practice as an end in itself, allows us to step fully into the Sangha Mandala. It encourages us to live and express our own unique life, to become truly who we are. Just going to end with a poem by William Stafford, When I Met My Muse. I glanced at her and took my glasses off. They were still singing. They buzzed like a lotus on the coffee table and then ceased. Her voice belled forth and the sunlight bent. I felt the ceiling arch and knew that nails up there took a new grip on whatever they touched. I am your own way of looking at things, she said. When you allow me to live with you, every glance at the world around you will be a sort of salvation. And I took her hand.